Hello, I have some things that I want to say about House of X number 2, because some of the ideas from my last two videos for House of X number 1 and Powers of 10 number 1 kind of connected to this one, and that was cool. It was a nice issue. We still haven't really seen the X-Men, which is weird, but it was really fun, and I kind of, the only thing I miss is like Moira being the only human in the X-Men stories, and it's kind of sad that she's no longer that ally, but um, this is so much cooler, so whatever. But I also thought it was kind of weird to, um, like, House of X seems so accessible and a nice jumping on point. I'm afraid that people that I would have recommended this book to who don't usually read X-Men might not find a story about Moira so exciting as the second issue of House of X. Anyway, but for us fans, it's a nice treat. So I just want to recap first the five, yeah, I guess, themes from my other video, House of X number 1. The themes in House of X number 1 that I identified were religion and biblical references, nation building, nature versus machine, alphabets, and like alpha and omega, and those plays of word, and time as a cyclical or linear concept. So first of all, religion is the most obvious in this comic book. Moira is revealed to have the power of reincarnation, but other than that, obvious, there are some references I thought to the Garden of Eden again, because Moira talks about how the world outside corrupts you, and not the when she's in the womb she feels at peace, and that's kind of like what is it's described when mankind leaves the Garden of Eden and bites into the fruit of knowledge. So what Moira's power essentially does is enable her to gather unlimited knowledge, and so it was cool to see how the more knowledge she amassed, the more disillusioned or cynical maybe she became. And I remember, like, in maybe the third life of Moira, she was described tricking her parents into using their money to further her agenda. And I thought, this character used to be so naive in the first life or two, and then now she's kind of like becoming more exposed to this world of knowledge, and it's taking away her innocence. And so that's a theme that we see also biblically, and I think that was used on purpose here, to parallel what happens in the story. And yeah, pretty much the further she gets into the story, the more ready to do evil, or more morally ambiguous, Moira became. Even in the end, killing, committing war, crimes of war, and so we're at her 10th life, and we'll see what kind of no bullshit world it is that Moira has planned for us now. But the second theme that we see in here is the time being cyclical or linear. So in the last issue, Powers of 10, number 1, we saw it open with a scene with Moira, and over her there was the birds flying in a circle, and I pointed out that that was a reference to time being circular in a loop, and that's what she creates in this comic book. Is she's stuck in this loop, in this Groundhog Day. You can even see one of the panels. There's a Groundhog's Day poster in the back. And she's really reliving the same life, but she's just making small changes. And that reminded me of those birds that I saw in the last issue. But then in the end of that issue, Powers of 10-1, the birds are shown to be flying in a linear formation. And I thought that was a reference to maybe there's a way to break the cycle, or maybe time is linear after all. So that's something that's being played with in this comic book. And there's even a panel where there's a MC Escher cartoon in the background, and it's like a loop. It's like a MC Escher loop. So I don't know. I'm not so convinced that it is. Time is circular, even though that's what he wants us to believe. We see it again in this diagram. Time begins linearly, and then it kind of does the loop. But it also continues linearly here, so I don't know what he wants us to think. For example, the apocalypse life that Moira lives, we never really see it end. It's hinted that she becomes eternal, and so that raises questions to me. I mean, from the nature of the mechanism of her powers, I'm led to believe that she had to die here to be born here in the last life, but we never see it end. So is it possible that maybe these two are happening concurrently? I don't know. Is she living multiple timelines simultaneously? Who's to say? Why not? And if she did become eternal, I guess she would maybe live simultaneously in two timelines. I don't know. But there's definitely a hashing out of linear versus cyclical time, and I don't know where it's going to lead. But, so another thing about this diagram is the sixth life we were not shown. It's omitted, so clearly she did something funky that we're not supposed to know yet. But in the beginning lives, she's really innocent, and she's kind of like naive, and it's contrasted by Destiny, who is very kind of rough and weathered and morally ambiguous, and she'll commit unethical crimes. When at that point, all Moira wants to do is use the powers for good and help humans, which obviously by the end she gives up on that idea, and becomes herself rough and weathered. So it's here in the middle, after the life where she creates a nation with Charles called Faraway, the dumbest name for a civilization, but or society. There's a gap there, and in that gap you can see in the spectrum it would have been red, and where other places where we've seen red have been just points of interest, or where things are really going to heat up. So, for example, obviously, who hasn't seen this? And the red issues are highlighted. Another place we've seen red highlighted was Franklin Richards, the Fantastic Four offspring. His name was also highlighted in red. So these are obviously things of importance that he wants us to pay attention to. But I'm thinking maybe Moira's life that is supposed to be the red line. Well, something definitely happened there because it was the point where she kind of lost her innocence for sure because she witnessed the genocide at Faraway, and then right after that she resorts to turning to people that she wouldn't normally turn to, like Magneto and Apocalypse, who have questionable means and who are more ruthless. So that was a turning point in her lives, where she lost her innocence. I would be tempted to think that that red life is affected by Franklin Richards for also being color-coded red, but I'm more inclined to think that it's actually maybe Sinister. I think that she would turn to Sinister before turning to maybe a Magneto or Apocalypse, because they have similar fields of study. So I don't know. That's my guess. Franklin Richards seems like a long shot for me because he's not really in that time span that she's living in anyway. But that's something to watch. I thought an odd thing about her living these lives is that she says that mutation is a cancer. I can see where she's coming from with that, and definitely this analogy is going to be used in the future more. We saw it already used in the first issue. Krakoa has the black areas where there are tumors, and you can't really see what's happening there. It's like shielded. It's a dark zone, and so that's a cancer itself. And in a way, it's kind of like alluded to that Moira is kind of a cancer because she's also a black spot that you cannot detect, and it's like abnormal activity. And Irene, Destiny mentions that she's kind of just this black mass that you can't see around, and that's what the tumors in Krakoa are described as. So I think that's just like a nice parallel. But I thought it was bizarre for her to call mutation cancer. She was already on her second life, I think, when she said that. I don't know. You'd think that doesn't sound like somebody who's lived 2 lifetimes to me. It's kind of a ignorant thought, a shallow thought. I don't know. I thought that was bizarre. I thought a scientist would know better than to say that. I don't know. But later she became more drawn to the idea of evolution and progress. So I guess she was okay with mutations. I don't know. I'm also thinking about, are they going to use her X genes? She clearly has an X gene that allows somebody to regenerate or reincarnate, and if we know that Sinister is going to be using X genes later and splicing them for benefit in war, I can definitely see some Moira soldiers walking around living eternal lives and amassing knowledge and data forever. Very dangerous weapons. Another thing that intrigues me is that I noticed she didn't have Proteus. She definitely had Proteus on purpose in the 10th life. So Proteus will definitely come up. He is strategically very valuable to her. She has all this knowledge, but limited power of what to do with it. She can change the future, but she can't really get her hands dirty. But her son is the perfect complement to her power. She can tell him what to do, and well, I don't know. I don't know how easily influenced he is, but he's a reality warper, and she could utilize that resource, that natural resource, to mold the world into what she thinks it should be, and who better to mold it than her, who has lived for so long and has learned so much about nation building. Speaking of nation building, is the other theme that was in the other comic books. Xavier has been playing with politics and economics and nationalism and identity, and I think we've definitely just learned who the Oracle is in the map there of Krakoa. There is an area that's designated as the Oracle, and definitely Moira is on the island. She knows how to build a nation. She did it before in a lifetime, and it was failed. She has the lessons to teach us. So I expect a smooth running machine out of Krakoa, using the information that Moira already learned from her mistakes at Faraway. And the other theme, language, we heard more Destiny say that her mutant name is Destiny, and that's again like what Cuckoo said. One of the Cuckoos said in the first issue, and I think it's giving importance to language and how it shapes culture, and how mutants are trying to define their identity and become their own nation, and how this language is a big tool, a big step to do that. And something that I keep forgetting to mention, I thought about it during Powers of X. We see also that all these plots are being hatched over acquiring information. Like Nimrod was after Data, and all these characters are after Data. Mystique was after Data in House of X #1, and the significance of Nimrod, like the data that in Powers of X that is so valuable, that the world, the history hinges on, or whatever, is we're talking about the information we're talking about is the genome, is DNA, and I think it's also fits that theme of language and its importance in the story and to life, because DNA is the language of nature. It's the alphabet of nature. So that's another way that language is tying into this book as a theme, and it's exciting to watch it be used in all its permutations by Hickman. And but we talked about in the first video, Alpha and Omega represents Magneto and Xavier, and how Moira was designated user Theta in the notes in the bottom of the book, and Theta is between Alpha and Omega, and how she is kind of going to be the middleman in this story, is what I thought. And if you look at the map of Krakoa, the Oracle, who I assume is Moira, is placed between Xavier and Magneto. So that analogy holds there. And then on the cover, she is placed in between Xavier and Magneto. I also think it's cool that they have the opposites facing each other, and we've got Cyclops facing Wolverine. You know, they're rivals. Cyclops represents loyalty and duty, and Wolverine rebelliousness. And we have Emma Frost and Jean Grey opposite each other, and Emma Frost kind of represents like a cynicism, and Jean Grey is kind of like a more character that is empathetic. She represents empathy and innocence, even. So they're really rivals, and the opposites, of course, of Xavier and Magneto have always been. Professor X represents idealism, and Magneto represents I forgot. Pragmatism. Pragmatism. Magneto represents pragmatism, the opposite of idealism. So it was interesting. I read a comment online that somebody said that if you're writing an X-Men story, you're basically playing chess. And I think that's cool because of all these opposite players on the board that I just mentioned. But also Moira was given her rival, and it was Destiny, who I'm so happy to see back. And what Destiny represents is Destiny represents the seeing of the future, and Moira represents the making of the future. But the thing is that Moira can make the new futures, but she can't predict the outcome until it happens. So she's kind of going in blind and hoping that her next decisions will yield the best results. Whereas Destiny is the opposite. She can see all the timelines. She can see every possibility, but she can't really put them into action, and that puts them at opposing ends. And so it's really cool to see meeting their matches. And as for Moira being the theta in between Magneto and Xavier, we do get a note in this book that Moira caused the rift between Magneto and Xavier, at least once upon a time. But first of all, that was definitely purposefully fed to the reader. And I think it's an idea that's going to bloom again. She's definitely going to do it again, and I think she's gonna be what kind of tears them apart or makes them enemies once again. I think that's been foreshadowed for sure. So I'm wondering which of her actions will be what leads them to separate again, because it's definitely coming. Well, I think that's all I have to say for now. I'd like to hear more ideas. I'm back. I just wanted to add something else that I forgot to say. I believe that Moira's going to become a darker character. Like we've seen in the trend, she just keeps behaving more and more dubiously and more recklessly, and hurting people as a byproduct of what she wants. And it makes sense, because if you've lived a life that is so long, you would the value of other people's lives would diminish, would become lost to you, and just like how she couldn't fall in love again during her second life. Um, it's that loss of innocence and the dark side of knowledge, like how she said that originally she thought it would be a blessing, but it turns out to be a curse, and that's what knowledge is, and that's what the Bible taught us in the creation myth. But another thing is that I read on CBR forums, somebody mentioned that there's a very Cassandra quality to this. Cassandra, like the Greek myth. And it's true. If you stop to think, why couldn't she, stop during her second life to try to prevent awful things that happen around the world? She really has no proof. Nobody would believe her if somebody told you that they had knowledge from that for the future, and it's because they've been reincarnated. It would be a Cassandra situation. No one would believe you. So I think that that's why she doesn't really intervene in things. Although it's important to mention that the rift that happened between her and Magneto in the 90s was because she meddled in his DNA to try to alter his free will. And this is what the story is about, is free will. How much free will does she have? Her mutant power is free will, basically. And I think that that's like a theme that will occur. She has so much knowledge that it might affect the free will of other characters. And it's funny that that was a storyline from the 90s for Moira. But another thing is, I hadn't noticed until somebody pointed out on Twitter that Moira is Greek for destiny. And I don't know if you remember learning about Greek mythology in school, but the Fates, like the three Fates, who were the destiny gods basically in the pantheon, their name in Greek is the Moirae, and that is another happy coincidence, a serendipitous destiny, the destiny of Moira, even though I think Claremont created her. Obviously, they didn't know that she would eventually become this plot device. But yeah, that's another cool thing. But yeah, watch out for Dark Moira coming up. Alright, that's really